record, and yeah, we'll keep running with it. So yeah, sorry to start you off and interrupt you, but for a little bit of context, I kind of asked about Show Wall and what it started. You gave a little bit of context about how it kind of started as your mission to kind of combat hyper individualism. You talked very briefly about how when you're trying to organize people, it's nice if you can have like things like financial incentives, but there are a lot of organizations and like nonprofits or church communities and so forth that are able to come together without that. So I think that's kind of roughly where we left off.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's basically, yeah, like 90% of the market is basically just a person has money and they just pay their employees
Right.
and they just get stuff done. And then there's like, that's like 90%. There's the 10% that is sort of like, could be like volunteerism. This can be much different things. It
Mm-hmm.
can be like fans, like of a celebrity, like they can be very like operational, for volunteering, like for free. And then there's also, you do things like science institutes like LNI or something open source like Wikipedia, you know what I mean? Things like this. There are things in the market that people are willing to do volunteerism for, but for the most part, it's like an impossible endeavor just because of there's so much hyper individualism. But even if there wasn't, it would still be a hard bet. Which is why you have to have more of an incentive matrix. So this is something I was talking about on my Telegram group, which is that like I tried, like it's hard to do just on pure vibes, you know what I mean? Which is
Mm-hmm.
why I had to add into the Dolan locos as like because they actually have incentives built in as like a startup, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I kind of got to hand myself here because we were kind of talking about like how I got it sort of got it going. And it was basically the whole battle was against the hyper individualism and like how to combat it because like it's because so maybe we should just like kind of start over just like how I kind of got into it in the beginning is like sort of my background. Like I sort of skipped like the philosophy stage
Right.
and I just kind of went for like the religion of childhood. Then I went right into literary works of fiction, sci-fi and fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went right into, then I found like NLI and the first principles and started learning NLaw. And so like I never went through like the philosophy step. So as a result, I was, and combined with the fact that like just um, like as my upbringing, like I had like it was just a strong magical upbringing, you know what I mean? So I just had like a lot of defenses basically against like postmodern like deconstructionism.
Right.
And so like for me, like it wasn't hard to fight the hyper individualism thing,
Mm-hmm.
but I recognize that like it's a problem for like a lot of people. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like just to get anything done, people like it's not just online. It's hard offline too. You know what I mean? It can be hard to organize things or get people to commit to things. So that's sort of like then I sort of realized that like you have essentially are like good commons. Like let's just say like you have like a church commons, like so it's very functional, like operationally, but because it has flaws ideologically that could potentially be deconstructed, what happens is like people are like sort of systematizing the destruction of their commons in the future because they don't have as many ideological defenses. Like especially just like against like sexual like secular deconstructionists, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But if you have like an egregore, like a startup egregore built up from first principles, you don't have that fear of the deconstruction. Um,
Mm-hmm.
which is what my whole point of creating Shieldwall was to create like a startup egregore based on first principles. Because if it's based off first principles, you can justify why like two or three or more people can work together without having to face like the hyper individual and deconstructionism all the way down to like the individual, which is the main problem that I sort of see online, which is like everything's like hyper individualized, and it's just very hard to form groups or to get cohesion going. Um,
Right.
and it's yeah,
So
it's a very complicated issue.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, and I definitely agree with you. Like I mean, just I think we identified just at many levels the need to organize, and not just financially, right? There's a lot of levels of organization, But
Yeah.
especially something like community organization that does have like actual principles behind it. But even within that, we find a lot of difficulty. Um, you said something that I resonate with, which is that I grew up in a kind of a magical religious community, and I think that definitely shaped some of the way I look at things, and also just kind of helped me wire towards a community and see the benefit of a community um, versus those that haven't, because a lot of other forces in our culture are definitely driving people towards the hyper individualistic direction. Um, one thing I wanted to say, so Shield Wall came about. I'm kind of curious. So did you um, how did you said you came across the natural law and the institute? How did your like was Shillwall before that or after, or how was yeah? So I'm curious about that.
Um, yeah, it's like yeah. So basically, like um, it's a little different for me. I don't know. It's
Well, I put it.
like
I'll put it like this. So, like, obviously, let's say, is there a rough like date and time that you can think of where the word shield wall came to you is like what you were going to name the group?
um yeah. It was around like 2019, 2020 when I started formulating it.
Okay.
So basically, what happened was, um, like, uh, I stumbled upon John Mark's videos,
Right.
which then like introduced me to Kurt's work,
Right.
but only like in passing,
Mm-hmm.
like because you got to remember, like I'm a Canadian, right?
Right.
And so it's like I recognized that was something interesting. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um, but basically, I thought that was really cool. I thought what they were doing was interesting. They had very good explanatory power.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but then when they imploded, sort of around that the election time,
Right.
they just kind of disappeared off the map.
Right.
And so, as far as I'm concerned, that had failed, and globalism had won, and the nationalists were going to be defeated inevitably.
Right.
So, as far as I was concerned, like, plus me being Canadian, this is already how we are already the most globalist nation in the world, anyways.
Right.
You know what I mean? So as far as I'm concerned, like network state, like a Disporsa was like what was going to happen.
Right.
Um, and so like I felt very passionately about the project, obviously.
Right.
And so like it became like the magic of that my childhood and young adulthood that
Mm-hmm.
continued. You know what I mean? Through this project, through my artist passion, through this project.
Yes.
And so like that was my assumption, and that was what I was building it.
Right.
Um, and it just, but it took on like more of like more of like an abstract, like you know what I mean, like thing. Like it became just my obsession with like an aesthetic, like singularity that would be optimized for group cohesion.
Right.
What you had, you know what I mean, like so that was sort of my my long term plan for it. But that was how it
So
came about.
yeah, so that helps me out. So it does sound like you probably had some pieces of this idea before, and obviously you came across natural law. Natural law did have a very big, at that time there's a lot of uncertainty. A lot of people probably thought it was completely dead, and a lot of different, not a lot, but at least a few different directions and projects probably kind of came out of that, where people saw either we needed to do something different or whatever. So it sounds like it's interesting to hear that like maybe Showall work kind of came to be about that time. And so obviously, like even though Natural Law kind of like rebranded, recovered, and has grown since, and done well, I assume like a lot of people that it doesn't feel like, oh, okay, they're back now. I'm just gonna set down what I was doing and like go. No, it's not like that. It's like hey, there's still a lot of unique momentum heading in this new direction that I'm passionate about. So that's kind of my next question is like, what what do you say? What do you think is unique about what you're trying to do with Showwall compared to what like the Natural Law Institute is trying to do? For example, I mean, obviously you've said that the magical thinking is a part of it, which I relate to, and we'll get into that. And also just the particular aesthetics that I think you like, just with the whole like the kind of the sci-fi, maybe some of that kind of stuff. So what and I know that's a couple, but again, what do you think distinguishes like what you're trying to do with Shieldwall with what the Natural Law Institute is trying to do, for example?
Yeah, so like that goes back to sort of like the thing where it's like um, it's like it started off like it became a magical journey for me. So what happened was when I uh, when I actually started like so the whole John Mark thing was like that was just a cool YouTube thing to me. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like that was just like it was interesting and yeah, good explanatory power, but like I was just working a normal job in like Canada. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't
Right.
that big a deal to me. But I once Kurt and Brad started doing their working sessions
Right.
and putting them on. Like I found them again just by accident, and that's when like I actually started to understand like a lot of the work.
Okay.
And so I started to get like a good understanding of it. And as the more I understood, the more I realized that there were like some serious like ideological implications that would result. And part of this was like because I wasn't a scientist as a sci-fi writer, so
Right.
I was looking at it from a different direction.
Mhm.
And so what happens here is in the writing community, like when you become a writer, basically the whole literary world is divided into two camps, which is basically Team Enlightenment and Team Romanticism. And what these are is these are like aesthetic preferences, essentially. Like there are two different philosophies, but they're based on a person's preference rather than some sort of abstract concept. And if you just go to something like tvtropes.com or something and you just type in like team romanticism versus team enlightenment, you can see it all, the whole war, sort of the culture war, like listed out. And obviously, like as a sci-fi fantasy writer, like when you go into that world, you have to choose which kind of side you favor, sort of in a sense.
Right.
And I always favor team romanticism, obviously, just because of my upbringing.
Okay.
But so what happens here is like I started to realize that with NLI getting to first principles, it's actually really bad for Team Enlightenment because now that they're at the end of their deconstructionist journey, you know what I mean? They're reaching the limits that they can deconstruct. And as a result, you're going to see a big swing towards Team Romanticism because people are going to have to use the first principles to actually construct things. And Team Romanticism is going to be way better at that than Team Enlightenment just because of the changes I think that natural law brings to the table. So I sort of saw this as like Shieldwall could be at the vanguard of Team Romanticism's sort of comeback into the human highest minds consciousness and kind of um, take back some ground.
Yeah, I love that. I feel I align with that a lot. The some of the what's the right word dichotomies that I've used is there's like the negativa and positiva. There's the subjective and the objective. There's the empirical and the magical. You get these kind of dichotomies. I've never heard of the Enlightenment versus Romanticism, which I'm interested. And I guess one of the like here's one of the first things that kind of stands out to me because like let's say that I list some of these dichotomies like negativa positiva, like science versus religion, subjective versus objective, empirical versus magical. To me, like enlightenment versus romanticism doesn't like perfectly map onto that. I will say the romanticism does kind of lean more towards like the positiva magical side, but I don't know, like yeah, I guess you could kind of see enlightenment as being like a quest for truth, and as part of that, it's like more of a scientific and empirical truth. Is that kind of accurate?
Well, it is in a sense it is very nuanced, like you will, but general like underlying currents are sort of like um, it is very nuanced. But I personally think a lot of it too is just sort of more. Um, it's hard to. I sort of think like Team Enlightenment is more like deconstructionist and more individualist, and like Team Romanticism is more creator archetype and more open to higher ideals and great causes. And I think, um, yeah, it's I think
you said the enlightenment side is more the deconstruction, whereas the romanticism side is more about construction
the
or creativity.
construction.
Yes.
Yes, and but
Yes.
there's also another subcurrent to this, which is like what Kurt sometimes talks about, which is like the pack instinct. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um, and so if you, because team romanticism favors the higher ideals and the self-sacrifice for higher causes in the form of heroism, they get this. They can experience more of the pack instinct sensation, which
Mm-hmm.
is basically a form of romanticism, whereas the team enlightenment would deconstruct into an individualist
Mm. Okay.
um, group, sort of. So it's my main thing is to combine three things here. Basically, which gets, I think it exemplified really well just by the Edolan Locals, which has the best incentive structure in Shieldwall at the moment. It has each Edolan has a ring, right? And this represents their metaphysical power in the form of their idolships and their position within Shieldwall. Then it has then it's the share, so it's also a business share in the profit or whatever the running of Shieldwall, and it's got the political one where you can vote in the elections of the Egregore, so it completes the triangle.
Okay. Interesting. Um, you know, I am starting to see these distinctions. This is helping me. So we got like the deconstruction versus the construction. You brought up about the idea of like heroism on the romanticism side versus like more individualism of the enlightenment. Now you did say one, which is like this, like you kind of frame it as like the romanticists or whatever are more in pursuit of like higher ideas. But I don't know, that sounds like enlightenment to me too. Like in the enlightenment are also trying to, but maybe when you say higher ideas, like it's just more abstract or more like philosophical ideas versus like enlightenment wants to know
Um,
like scientific like truths, you know?
Yeah, it's the definition is a little different in the literary world because it's not so much the battle between team enlightenment and romanticism in the literary world isn't so much it's more a aesthetic preference in the literary
Mm-hmm.
world than it is like a hard like scientific concepts in like traditional philosophy.
Okay.
So it's almost kind of actually um, like if you bring it up here, or just go to tvtropes.com,
Mm-hmm.
or just type in team enlightenment versus team romanticism. And another thing I'll just say too is like one of the reasons like that you can get from like a group effect is one person doesn't have to like represent everything. Like we get to get different adolams that represent different sides to different issues. You know what
Right.
I mean?
Right.
And we can have more variety. It's a little different right now when you just have one, where what I say is like rubbing off on Shield Wall itself, which isn't always my intention. Although I do have some ideas for it. A lot of it too is just my ideas for like how things are going to work out sci-fi wise in the future, and my guesses about
Right.
how things are going to go.
Right. So you brought up you mentioned something again, which is that this whole enlightenment versus romanticism frame kind of exists within the literary world or within the world of of fiction writing, right? But you obviously have this like outside of the world of like fiction and writing, you have like actual scientists who are kind of more of that enlightenment. So does that do you kind of see what I'm getting at here, that this enlightenment versus romanticism frame is not all encompassing, like that just exists within the fictional world, but even that whole spectrum is more skewed towards the magical, and because you're doing fiction, right?
Yeah, exactly. And
Okay.
that's the thing that the point I'm trying to get across though is that once you learn the method and you have all the first principles, the
Mm-hmm.
only thing left to actually work with is that side. That's why I'm kind of saying that like it is if Team Enlightenment reaches the end of its deconstructionist road, then what that is no longer a rival faction. It's just a grade in school that you got to go through on the way to work with higher things.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's sort of like what I'm looking forward, like what I'm doing as a sci-fi writer is I'm projecting forward a time when something like N-Law isn't uncommon. You know what I mean? Like if
Mm,
every group is natural law, how would you compete with each other?
I
And
love that. I love that.
what I'm trying to
Yes.
point out is that if all the natural law groups are operating on reciprocity, and you have an egregore that can kick up to the heroism OODA loop because people favor team romanticism and just the high ideals of it, the
Right.
self-sacrifice of being a hero, then we can have a faster OODA loop than all the other egregores out there that just run purely. Like I'm trying to upgrade, you know what I mean,
Yes.
in a
Yes.
sense.
No,
You know what I
I love
mean?
that frame a lot about the forward thinking and like once you have those foundations, then what does that look like? And that's the beauty of like sci-fi writing and thinking is just about that forward looking and you know it's like it's always this balance between like what's the next step and like what's the long term vision, and that's why I think we're going to be able to work really well together is because we're able to tap really we're uniquely able to tap into that longer term vision, but we're also I think able to bridge to the now.
Exactly,
So
dude. Yeah, I totally agree, 100%.
so let's see. I had another point. I think I may have lost it though. But yeah, so I like that. Oh. So you mentioned first principles in the method. So here's one thing I kind of enjoy doing because like upon because I'm still like studying some of like the details of it myself. But one thing I like to do for people who have known about it for a while or just I like to get anybody's unique perspective. Like if I were a random person, like an elevator pitch or something, and I ask you like what is the method, like within natural law, like how would you articulate that in a simple kind of way?
I would just say like the limits of disambiguation.
The limits of disambiguation, right? So basically, the way I think about it is, it's basically it's a method for truth telling. It's about being able to speak and to discern truth. And
Yeah.
yes, and basically by disambiguating is what that, uh, and that's the thing too is that I had been writing down some of the different components, like the subcomponents of the method recently. I don't think I have my sheet pulled up here, but it's like you've got obviously disambiguation, which is about like making something clear when it's not clear. But then you also have like falsification, like is it true or false? You've got operationalization, like can you put it into action? So there's a lot of different pieces of it, but I think you're right. Like you hit on the kind of the head.
Yeah.
Um,
It's funny for me because like on the one hand, like I operate more like to build it so fast and to keep to keep ahead of the curve. Like I operate on intuition a lot.
yes,
But on the flip side of that, like because it's so operational, like I test it daily. You know what I mean?
right,
Did someone join the group today? No. Okay, well there's a flaw in our aesthetic somewhere.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like so it's operational every single day. So it's kind of like a flip side. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah, absolutely, and that's kind of a bigger part of like of the decidability. Just kind of like
yeah,
how you frame things and how you make decisions based on that. Um,
yeah.
yeah, very good. So the other thing, in a similar note, so how do you kind of articulate or define first principles? Like, what does that mean to you, or like what are the first? Like what does that what does that mean to you?
Um, I would just say like what the lowest level of or the highest level of disambiguation for a certain topic.
The highest level of disambiguation. Yeah, so basically you cannot disambiguate any farther. This is as far as you can go for whatever it is.
Yes. However, like once again, like even though like I say, I'm definitely want to learn the method, but
Right.
at the same time, I'm approaching this also as a poet and as a sci-fi writer.
Yeah, and like you said too,
Whereas,
yeah, like a lot
no,
of it's very
well,
intuitive for you, and
yeah,
yeah, and that's the way I
but
look
it's
at
not.
it. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's because like when I see like some of like Kurt's work and I see their formulas, like that, like I can see like that's just like as me as like a poet, like some of that stuff blows me away. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
you'll just read one of their tweets or something,
Yeah.
and you'll see a disambiguation all the way down to first principles, and
Right.
you'll just be like, holy shit, like that's fucking crazy.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so then what I can do is I just think, well, what's if this is the baseline,
Right.
how do you turn this into an aesthetic that can kick up to the next level?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm just doing across the entire method. Basically, I just like
Yes.
not in a systematic way, but as like a hippie poet, a sci-fi writer, bouncing my way through the whole method, trying to aestheticize all of it.
That's really funny because I want to go back to the deconstruction versus construction frame, because I do think, yeah, like NLI has mastered the art and science of deconstructing, they're taking things apart so beautifully. But then it's like, well, it's our job, like as like the poets and the creators and the positiva operators, to then, like you said, put it back together, create aesthetics, operation. That's true operationalization. And that's kind of the funny thing about operationalization, a word that I struggle to say every time. But that's the funny thing about it, is that there's like two sides of it. One side of operationalization is understanding the operations that led to it, and that's kind of the deconstruction part. And then like once you've got there, you understand what the thing is and where it came from, then it's like, okay, well, let's put it into action now. Let's operationalize it on the other side, right?
Yes.
So that's
Yes.
and that's something I like that a lot. So yeah. So
And like I'm also like really giddy as like, because like before, like you would have like these commons, but they could be deconstructed ideologically, so like they were kind of weak. But now if you build one from first principles, then
yes,
that's no longer a
yes,
problem. You know what I mean?
yes,
So, and
absolutely.
that's also too, like I don't understand like why people like it should be easier to sell things like shield wall or these new first principle egregores to other Brahmins. You
Yes,
know what I mean? Because of that game changing principle.
yes.
But it's not because they're scared of operationalism too, right? So they're gatekeeping, sort of like the critics are sort of gatekeeping.
Well, here's a frame that might be this. I think it will be very essential to us. So like you just said beautifully, like a lot of things like Christianity, for example, is not like very well constructed on a foundation of like first principles and like reconciled with like nature and
Exactly.
science. But so what we're doing basically is talking about like building a worldview, a religion, a culture, etc., organization, community on first principles, right? Which is a lot more solid. Now, one thing I will say as part of that, you said, well, you would think that would just sell because it's natural. Well, this goes back to the tree symbol and why I like it so much, which is that it is rooted in the natural law and in the first principles. But you are able to then branch, when you're talking about the via positiva, you can branch out in many different directions. Like there's a lot of different aesthetics that might appeal on top of that.
Exactly.
And so
Yeah.
so what it is I think it's kind of a game of kind of like capitalizing on all of those markets. Like there might be like the sci-fi market, and there's like the fantasy market, and then there's like the there's the Nat Sox, and there's the pagans, and there's Christians, and there's like these different groups and
Exactly.
different via positiva formulations that we can attack. And so yeah, it's just kind of that's kind of what it is. And what you may be looking at is that, like for example, Shieldwall in particular may be positioned like within a particular frame. It definitely does sound like it's heavily sci-fi, and that it's going to have a market, right? But it just may not. It may be harder to get rolling just because it's only a piece of it. So you're going to have to sift through a lot of people. You're going to have to find those more sci-fi wired people, and even within that sci-fi branch, you might find people that like different sub aesthetics, right? Because again, within this world of preferences and whatnot, it's going to get. So really, the goal and what I've tried to do as my frame to the order is to basically say from the beginning, like we're not necessarily trying to promote any like particular positiva aesthetics, and we're just trying to basically allow kind of build a network or a bridges to the natural law and kind of help see
Yeah, exactly.
And this is even what NLI is doing a piece of too. They're saying, hey, we are kind of just compiling the first principles, and then we are not, and we're not dictating what the positiva should be. We're just making sure they don't break the law and stay within the limits, and then they can go wild. And so we're just kind of the next level, saying, okay, well, we're going to try to bridge from you to everybody else and what they want, kind of create a hub. That's kind of how I framed it, right?
Yep.
So that could be a good. This is a great. What I wanted to kind of accomplish, a big part of what I wanted to start to work towards is like, what we've been doing with our projects and how they fit together. And if I'm not mistaken, this could be a working frame. Is that you've got Natural Law Institute as like the roots of the tree. Where I'm trying to position the natural order is to be like the sort of like the base of the tree, I guess you could say, because we're trying to be connected to the roots, but also kind of like the common hub for the branches. And then like when we start to explore what those branches are, I think that Shield Wall would be a very significant, if not pretty much the like branch for like the sci-fi aesthetics that kind of come off of that, right?
Well, what I'm trying to combine is cyberpunk and Hellenism.
Oh, okay, beautiful. Yes, because Greco-Romanism is a big aesthetic that I have been targeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and see that's the interesting thing too about the branches on the tree is a lot of them will be like combining and merging. All kinds of stuff will
Yeah.
be happening. And I'll say because and I don't remember if I brought it up last time, but I've been working with a few of the main branches, and I've already listed some of them today, and a few of the aesthetics or markets that I've been considering. So of course you've got the people who operate in the natural law of science, like the very objective people, and then you've
Yeah.
got you've got some political aesthetics, right, in general. And that's maybe separate, because I'm more culturally focused. But anyway, you got like Christians is a big faction. You've got like a big pagan.
Yeah.
You got a lot of different pagan factions. That includes all like even Hinduism, Norse
Yeah.
pagan and Celtic, blah blah blah. Now you've got I've been grouping everything under. I've got a big pop culture branch, which to me
Oh,
that's like
nice.
that's like everything fiction, fantasy, like World of Warcraft, Warhammer,
Yeah.
Star Wars, like all stuff. I feel like there could be a very big
Lots there.
pop culture
Yeah.
branch. And then I've got like a Europeanism branch that kind of like
Nice.
encompasses like the Hyperborean and a lot of those kind of like Nat Sock aesthetics and stuff. I've got a philosophical branch, which I think would definitely capture like the Greco-Romans as well as like the Enlightenment philosophers and even the medieval Christian philosophers.
Nice.
And then finally, my last one I have written down currently is like an occultist branch that would have like the Hermetics and the esoterics and all that kind of stuff grouped together. So these are some big branches I'm working on, and obviously those will divide into smaller branches. There's probably other big branches I haven't even thought about. They're going to be merging, but hopefully that starts to paint a frame or a picture of like the different markets that we want to hopefully try to capitalize.
Nice. Yeah, dude, that sounds awesome. We could definitely, yeah, we'll have to organize like, yeah, yeah, a
Yeah,
lot
so
of different factions to bring in. Definitely
yeah.
a lot of different factions to bring in.
So this may be. I may start. I'm kind of imagining in my head. I think I'm gonna make like a graphic that's gonna be like a tree shape, and I'm gonna have like, and I'm gonna start to try to plot different groups on it, and how they may be able to relate to this overall federative structure, this overall like tree federative structure maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be interesting to explore. Yeah, and if it comes to be like, for example, like let's say like there was because adversarialism is key, like having other like quote unquote competitors who are doing something similar. Like if another entity came along like the natural order that wanted to be like a hub, then that would just be like then therefore it would just become a one like instead of the natural order being the base of the tree, it would just be one of the key one of those key branches and so
Yeah.
forth. So yeah, this could help us. This could help us like keep these projects together. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. It's, so like, I sort of like incorporated that as like sort of into Shield Wall. Like my plan was like every Edolan would just have like their own hyper sigil and they just kind of do their own thing. And basically they would just have their own commons that would just boost everyone. So like mine would be like you could just be like a neutron, and then your group could be the order. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then we bring in like another Edolan, and he could be like someone else, and he could have his own group, and that way you get lateral stratification instead of vertical,
Right.
which is
Yeah, so this is kind of what I was going to ask you, which is that like I may have anticipated like could Shieldwall function at that core level of like federating and creating the hub for others, and then yet almost like the other way around. Now, one concern I have with that, and one way that I kind of measure it, is based on like the symbols and the language that are used, right? So a lot of the language you see in the symbols and the aesthetics you're going for are more within that like fiction or sci-fi realm, right? Which is farther away from like the roots, which is farther away from the scientific descriptions and so forth. So does that make sense?
well, I'm trying to avoid that. Like,
Right.
I want to use all the first principles just built off that, an aesthetic off that, and I want to make it as like my plan is like with the Edolan is you have like let's just say 100 of them. They each have one share, and then you basically just have like the influence of 100. Basically, I guess you could say like info generals or info celebrities or whatever, each doing their own thing,
Yeah.
and they just come together as a commons through underneath the substrate of Shield Wall's aesthetic and metaphysics. So it would so each Edolan would kind of be like, I sort of see them as like info knights, like it's like an order of like 100 info knights called Edolans, and that's how they organize. It's just the aesthetic that they operate under.
Okay, so I just thought of something real. I thought of something really like cool, which is that okay, yes. So like
So can I just finish? Like,
yeah,
I just want to add something really here.
yeah,
Is because this isn't just just a summary just for us to organize better. It's also too like every person's hypersigil. They build the brand like
yes,
within the aesthetic, right? And so what happens is after a few years, you can sell your hypersigil, which is basically like a hero alter ego, right? You can then sell that to the next person or just pass it on, whatever you want to do. You know what I mean? It's just the options there. So you can build up its metaphysics, its actual material value, and its operational value like over time. You know
right,
what I mean? So it's sort of just new Batman's coming in. You know what I mean? Like, you're training your successor. You know what I mean? And then it's kind of like an apprentice thing too as well. Um, so like my main thing is I just want like the Adolans like could I get like 100 like info knights to work together? You know what I mean? Like in some way. Like that's the goal. Like that's the end game. You know what I mean? Just get 100
yes,
people and just trust each of them to they're each of them high agency. They'll have their own vertical stratifications, but the Adolan locus itself would just be a vertical stratification of 100 info heroes, I guess we'll call
right.
them.
I love
You know what
that.
I mean? Like people who are willing to self-sacrifice, both for Shield Walls fans and also for the public commons in general.
Right. Yeah, I really like that. I think the way I'm imagining it is that ultimately the structure that we're talking about is kind of like an objective that goes beneath any kind of like even the things at the very core at the root that like the science describes. Like these things are objective. Ththese things are, yeah, I mean, that's the right word, objective. Like for example, like what I'm trying to get at here is like even the scientific words that we use to describe things at the most empirical level are ultimately subjective. Like a word can be
Right.
repurposed entirely. So there's this like layer of distinction. So
Yeah.
so what I'm trying to express here is that like there is an objective layer of what we're trying to do that can be described in many ways, and based on what framing, what language system, what positiva, what aesthetic you like, we can basically, yeah, we can like cater the entire frame to that, right? And so
Yeah.
like right now, for example, you and me both have like a conceptual understanding of this like objective thing, and we're currently framing it different, and that's okay, because and that's exactly what we're trying to do, is to
Yes.
be able to frame things differently, but connect that back to what the objective thing that's being framed.
Yeah. And
That is the goal. Yes.
yeah, and it's not just the frame. It's also too that like different Eidolons are expected to fulfill different archetypes. You know what
Yes.
I mean? So there will be different. Like I sort of see it as like a Neo Camelot, right? And the Eidolon loco is going to be the Knights of the Round Table. You know what I mean? Like I know I have the aesthetic skills to bring that to the fore.
Yes.
So that's how I'm seeing them. And
Yes.
you know how it is for the Knights of the Round Table. They're all different. They all have different characters, different personalities,
Right.
different backgrounds. They have different objectives. And that's how I see like I want Shieldwall to be able to run or to without the founder eventually. You know what I mean? Like it has to
Yes.
just run on its own.
That's the goal. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, to get rid of Merlin eventually, right? You know what I mean? Just let the knights function on their own.
Hell yeah.
So that's basically what my sort of mindset.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, that's helped me a lot. That's really good. Yeah. um yeah.
I know that like just because of my background, like in sci-fi and also just stalking the scientists, including others who are outside of the NLI, and my consumption of all of the sci-fi and fantasy fiction over the years as like a competitive writer, I know I have the aesthetics to create that Neo Camelot. You know what I mean? So it's just a matter of time and working on the aesthetics. But like I say, within that, any influencer can just do whatever they want as long as it falls for principles, like you said.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I'm almost just like kind of digesting this as far as next steps, and uh
So I just want one thing I just kind of thought of, just want to add in is like, um, eventually, just because I couldn't get the vibe alone to work, I just started organizing the incentive structure where it just makes like actual financial sense for each Adolan now.
right.
They're just shareholders. They get metaphysical capital through the hypersigils, which can they get political votes in the egregore. They get shares in the like Shieldwall Inc. if it comes to that. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
so all the incentive structures for them work out fine. You know what I mean? It's just that just kind of happened by accident, just because the vibe wasn't enough. So I just ended up operationalizing normally, anyways. So, but now we have both.
Hell yeah. Yeah, that's really key. I mean, we talked about it earlier. Like, there's this baseline of like financial incentive, which ties in and is important. But then if you got like, other layers of like what motivates people to do things, um, and of course, like like with money, like that has some complications, and you have to be like very careful. But you can't, you have to keep that in mind. Like, it's super relevant. Um,
Yeah.
and then just like with this other realm of incentives is is more where I've been operating. Like what, because ideally, especially for some of the like quote unquote inner circles, and just in general for these types of organizations, like for churches and stuff, you don't want them to become purely motivated by money. Like, people are only here because they're getting paid
Yeah.
to be here. Like, you want them to be here because they connect with the vision. They are motivated by that.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
that's why I've been focused on that as the priority. But it sounds
Yeah.
like your incentive
And
system ties in a little bit of both, basically.
well, I had to, because what you just described was the ultimate system, because that was the faster system, right? Because that was the higher trust system. But aesthetically, I just couldn't pull that off, so I had to go to the other system anyway. And I just aesthetically, I just think we kind of ended up with both. So it should be good, like you say. I think we can get both out of it, because ideally, like on the one hand, like you expect some self-sacrifice, you know what I mean, for the commons. But if you push it too far, then it's becomes disfavorable or whatever, discouraging. So it's a balance, I guess. It's just a balance.
Yes, I love it. I love to hear it. I love to hear someone else say that, because that's one of my like mantras almost at this point. Like, just so many things, balance and so many
Yeah.
things, and I don't know why that's been such a tough concept. For a lot of the NLI guys, it's just like, I don't know. It's something I'm
Yeah.
still trying to figure out. But yeah, we'll get there. Um,
My sort of thing as a sci-fi writer is I was always stalking scientists. I was never interacting with them. You know what I mean? So I was always a lurker.
Well, it's kind of funny. I think that's kind of how I've resolved to do it, because I was kind of like just kind of testing them to see where they're at, and I think I've found like the limits of like of their operation,
Yeah.
basically, which is that, and it is very much along the lines of what we were talking about, which is that, like, for example, when I'm talking to a Christian, I don't try to like smack. I don't try to like constantly get them to adopt my frames and my words.
Right.
I
Yeah.
understand their frame enough that I can translate what I'm saying into words that
Yeah.
they understand. Like, instead of nature, I'll say God and stuff like that. Well, it got
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
that point
Yeah.
where I realized it would probably be beneficial to just do that with the institute, because it was kind of the
Yeah.
same thing, because they're set in their ways. They have their frames, which are very dense, and I have so many problems with it. I'm like, oh my god, this could be so much simpler and better and more aesthetic and all this kind of stuff, but they don't care.
Yeah.
They don't operate that way. So it's kind of like, well,
Yeah.
when I'm talking to them, use I'm gonna use their language and their frame.
It's
So
yeah, it's very strange right now, honestly, dude, just because like you look at Kurt's and Brad's videos,
yeah,
and like they cap out at like 300 to 500 video views.
right,
But their vocabulary is popping up everywhere.
yes.
You know what I mean? So there's something weird going on here. Either it's just like they just have like a lot of VIPs like watching them, or I don't know what's going
Well,
on there
I think a
exactly.
lot of it's probably just that, just that the ideas have been around for a while. Like, for example, like, yeah, let's say there's like 300 people watching them, and those 300 people go out and interact, and that gets the language out there a little bit. But I think a lot of what it
True,
is
true.
people who have just maybe interacted in the past and have gotten these concepts and these languages into
True.
circulation, and they
Yeah,
have just
yeah.
kind of continue to go from there, because they're some of the more efficient stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's also, I just gotta say, like you and me too, like very few Brahmins are actually like interacting with NLI. You know what I mean?
Exactly, because
Uh,
of that. Yeah,
so
there's not a good bridge
like
right now. It's just kind of like, you're either
yeah,
with us or you're not speaking our language, and you just need to get the fuck out. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Like we're pretty rare. You know what I mean? Like it's not just that; it's also that you have to be able to survive the sacred cow thing. You know what I mean? Because like I don't know how like for me when I listen to it, like just because um like fictionalism is already art. You know what I mean? Like it's very like I didn't have any sacred cows really to like, you know what I mean? Like I never listened to a video that was like, oh, I can't listen to this. You know what I mean? But maybe other people do. You know what
Right.
I mean? In a sense where it's just a little too much for them. I don't know personally, but maybe that's an aspect as well. I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's
Maybe.
a weird thing about a lot of things that in a lot for me, which is that like it's the second I stood in the door, like I was already moving in this direction, like I already saw what they're doing, I was already kind of doing that kind of stuff, like being able to just basically like fundamentally like discern truth and speak articulately, and
Yeah.
like my models and my maps and my worldview, like understanding evolutionary
Yeah.
computation, all this kind of stuff. Like
Yeah.
I pretty much I got it already. I just didn't speak their language. I just had my ways of understanding it and my ways of describing it. And because and I think that's a problem that they have is that they're not really looking at that objective quite as much. Like they are stuck on their words and they kind of conflate their descriptions with the objective. And
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a problem. Like they're not, and so they have assumed like, well, you haven't done the work, you don't understand it because you're not describing it like we do. But they're just not counting. They're not accounting for this like this fundamental. Like again, even if you're using the most mathematical, physical, scientific language, empirical you can, it's still subjective. Like I said, we could say tomorrow that the number two actually means a quantity of four now, and if everybody decides to
Yeah.
run with that, then it sticks. Um, so
Mm.
so yeah, that's been a big problem. But like I
I
said, yeah, I really get
yeah.
it.
I mean, I sort of like I'm sort of fine as NLI just as an institute, like as a scientific institute, just because I just need the first me as like a startup or even like a solo entrepreneur or philosopher entrepreneur or whatever. Like I just want the first principles so I can operationalize my thing, right? So like I sort of see them as like a school. I'm just trying to learn something really quick so I can go back into the market.
Well, yeah,
Um,
that's like what I learned was really it was about me just understanding what their limits were and what their scope was, because
yeah, yeah,
because like my vision, like yours probably for a long time, is like a almost like a very very visionary, very full accounting, like looking at the
yeah,
whole picture. And I was kind of
yeah,
like, man, these are some of the best guys with the best organization that's out there. Let's see how far they can go. And it's like, okay, I
yeah,
get it. They are content to operate
yeah.
within this certain capacity. And
And
yeah, so
yeah, I just think also too that actually does help us as like the base and the branches.
yes,
You know what I mean? Like
yes,
keeping them in that position,
yes,
because really, like besides professionalism, there's really no other aesthetic you can adopt that it doesn't compromise like scientific integrity or something like that. You know what I
right,
mean? So they gotta be a little careful with that, and I'm fine with that. Like I say, like um, I'll just let the roots do their thing, and I'll just
yes,
be a branch.
exactly. Yeah, and that's the thing too. I think one of the problems and frustrations has been that I guess in a way it's almost like the more like it's like no one has to care or cares about like the what's above them, so to speak. Like the roots don't care about what's
Yeah,
above them, but the roots don't need the base, but the base needs the roots, and the branches need
yeah,
the.
yeah,
So that's kind of how it is, and so that's been a little frustrating. Like they are very much that looking down, and they're not really like looking up, but
yeah.
that's okay. And
Yep.
now the only part of it though is this again, like there are some obstacles that get in the way of that, which is that like whenever they're not, they think they're doing a full accounting. Like for example, Kurt like tries to oftentimes write off like any kind like a lot of the branches and stuff like that, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I was like, it'd be one thing if they said, "Here's our scope," and we're not gonna really like comment outside of it. But when they're trying to like make statements and dictations about things outside of the scope without necessarily doing an accounting. Sometimes they're pretty good about it.
Yeah.
He's pretty good about it. They're usually like we do that. Like what was funny is like in my founding statement and when I was the things part of what informed me to create the natural order was some of the descriptions that I saw on the website from Kurt that basically says
Yeah.
like we as an institute operate within the negativa, the law, and the science. This is our scope.
Yeah.
And he's like, now the positiva, the religious piece is going to be probably a separate, and there may be multiple, and I'll get to that later. But that so he's framed it well at times, but at other times it's kind of been
Yeah.
like we do everything. So it's like
Yeah.
okay,
It's also too. It was an inevitable byproduct of like the Kurtz with Brad. Like I personally just feel I think they're doing the best they can with what they got. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
the things, the talks with Brad, it's inevitable that he's going to go off on the long talks. That's where
Right.
we learn so much. Like that's where I learned a ton, when he deconstructs all the way down and all the way back up again.
Hell yeah.
But at the same time, it was inevitable that they would veer out of via negativity into via positiva in some sense, and it gets muddled a little bit.
Right. Yeah, but yeah, overall, that's my takeaway though. Is that it's great work. It's a great foundation. That's why we are like trusting that like, hey, this is we want to build our roots on this. Like, and I will say too, like even within like that scope of the roots, I think there is some work to be done. But I'm kind of okay not to really work there, like because a lot of, again, like across the entire tree there is this idea that like for example the root will understand the branches in certain ways, and the branch will understand the root in certain, and there will be different framings
Yeah,
based on where you're
they
coming
can both
from.
feel the wind. Yeah, in a sense.
Yeah, and I'm content to be like I'm operating at like the base or like the branches, and so it's like I'm kind of saying I feel like the roots could be done better, but that's because it's like
Yeah.
I'm looking at it from this perspective, and even if I'm not, yeah, I don't know, honestly. Like I do kind of I do kind of feel like, because okay, so I think I wanted to come back to something earlier, because not only are we translating across different aesthetics, for example, we are
Yeah.
also there's also things like translating across like IQ levels, for example, or like
Yeah.
that's a great one. That's a very relevant one. Like, if even if you're not, even if you're trying to explain something very empirically and scientifically, the way you can describe that will differ to if you're trying to get across to 160 IQ versus a 100 IQ, right?
Right.
So that's, I think that's kind of where I'm getting at as far as some of the, I have learned to draw the lines and understand the distinctions of scope and so forth. But even within those scope, I still do have a few things that I think could be improved. And like we all do, we all have plenty of room to grow and improve. And so
For sure. Yeah.
that's just one of the things I still push for. But and I think I've almost thought at times that the order could be positioned to help with that. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll
Like I
see.
say, like it would be good. Like I sort of see, like we could each have like our own like little retinues and groups. You know what I mean? And we'll form our own little. We'll have our own little federation, like a little mini federation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Something like that.
So one of the things I wanted to come back to was so like with the shill wall, for example. So some of these words you throw out there, like info nights and so forth, like they are, like that's a great frame. Like it's a very aesthetic frame that will appeal to some, but as far as like intuitive, like if I were to go out to somebody on the street and be like, I'm an info night, they'd be like, what the fuck, like they have zero, like it's kind of farther out from the colloquial, so to speak. And so there is this kind of
That's
right.
yeah. I mean, like so the like what I'm doing, like I wouldn't use that terminology. Like that was just like with us, like just as
Internally,
explain
right?
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, internally, so publicly, it would just be like they're edol and hypersigils. That's all. So what happens here is like the aesthetic we're copying is like the Marvel aesthetic, right? On a smaller level, like on a
Okay,
more
yeah.
real level,
Yeah, I
like an
like that.
operational level, right? Like Avengers or like DC or like the superhero groups. So
Right.
that's what I'm trying to copy. But here's the thing. That aesthetic doesn't work in the real world. Like that, there's a reason why you don't just like dress up in a cape and like run around.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So, but if we go with my path, like if we follow this, like we can't go all the way down it. We can use it as a guide, but it's not operational in the real world. But we can use some of that stuff into like that's how I sort of see it as sort of they're just hypersigils like Eidolons, and they would just be all their ego brands, like meta brands that you just build on or year after year, person after person. I guess like a really good analogy would be like James Bond.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's the same character, it's the same brand, but it's played by different actors over the years.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, and like you said, it's
Yeah.
like this idea of archetypes or like specializations. Like if you could imagine, just imagine it like a company. Like a company has like a CEO and whatever CFO,
Yeah.
and IT, and then like people fill into those roles. And so it's like, and we're kind of in like a cultural institution with like a Brahmin or like a priest class, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I like that.
And another thing I also got like people got to say is like they're talking about like Kurt like talks about cultivating like a neo aristocracy, like an aristocracy, and like if you just want like if you're lucky enough that you can like somehow become like a baron in England or something, like that's awesome.
Right.
But otherwise, like you're gonna have to adopt some new cyber new aesthetic for an aristocracy. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to be an all-encompassing one. Like it just be our little niche or whatever.
Yeah.
But we need something for like that's sort of the goal is to create because like James Bond is like sort of like he's a neo aristocrat. You know what I mean? Like imagine that aesthetic like played by different actors, but in more of a real role, like through as like real creators.
Hmm.
So like I'm a poet, like I'm maneuver one, like I'm N1. I'm the first host body. Like I'm a poet, you know what I mean? I write around on my e-board. Maybe I'll do some podcasting or something. Maybe I'll end up as like a stand-up comedian in a few years, or who knows? You know,
Oh, hell yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And then I like pass that on. Then like after I want to retire, so I take Maneuver's meta brand, like James Bond or your Maneuver, the brand, the hyper sigil, the ring, and then I would just sell it if I wanted to, or just give it, or have like a prodigy or something, who I would get going to give that brand to, and now they're the new Maneuver. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, just like Sean Connery was the first, and then after that you had, the next guy, and then it goes down the line
Yeah.
until you get to like Daniel Craig or whatever. You know, and
Yeah.
each guy's putting his own spin on the brand.
Yeah, so one thing I'm thinking about is like obviously like there's a lot of like parallels with fiction. So like if you took something like Marvel and like you have like some guy would write about Batman and then someone else would take up and start write a few episodes of like or comics of Batman.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and so
exactly.
but the Batman is like its own symbol or whatever that gets either sold or like passed for intellectual property. And I
Exactly.
would say like we and a lot of what you're doing especially is definitely a lot more in that direction. And I would say that one of the main ways that it differentiates is I think what we're trying to build and offer is more than just like you go to more than just like you go to a movie and like watch a Marvel movie and you're like, oh, you just
Exactly.
entertain. We're actually like
There,
building like a framework, a system, like a community, like an actual like rituals, like actual yeah,
yes,
very
because
systematized. Yeah.
so like this is where the operation comes from. Is like the Adolans. They aren't the creation. They're the creators. Like they're the ones who are creating things. You know what I mean? So they're operationalizing at that level.
Yeah.
So like the Adolan is like he's not the movie. He's the director,
Mm.
or like he's not the guy picking up trash. Like he's not like the guy making a movie about, or he's not like a movie about a charity. Like he actually like would work with one or something. You know what I mean? Or he would make one or something.
Right.
So they're creators at heart, which is what the hyper sigils represent. That's where that heroism aesthetic can come from. They're contributing to the commons, even as just promise. You know what I mean? But
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
they're aesthetic.
I
So you can
really
see
like
where
the.
you can see where this info hero like mindset that I'm trying to pass on. It's like that's what I'm seeing. Like I see these guys as like these are like info heroes, like an operationalized Avengers
Yes.
that like is your job to contribute to the public commons. Like when this hyper sigil, when you inherit it, that's the patent of nobility, and it comes with
Yes.
rules.
Status.
You have to you are now a part of the slave caste. You serve the public. You know what I mean, and you
Right.
will do so until you give the mantle on to someone else. But at the same time, like that's the metaphysical angle. But financially, for the people who need to be persuaded with that, these Adolans, they are patents of nobility. Like imagine like an Adolan as like one of these like influencer houses. Like you have a house, you know what I mean, where this Adolan's brand like lives. Like every time like the new guy moves in, like this is his like White House.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that could come along with the brand as like a smart contract. Like when you pass on like when I pass on maneuver, you pass on neutron, the meta brand, the alter ego.
Right.
That could come with like a house. It could come with like a car. Like it could come like with maneuvers like flying board or whatever. You know what I mean? Like there could be things attached to the brand, like actual, just like James Bond is well known for his cars,
Right.
or you know what I mean, or something like that. Like you see, like I'm seeing, like I'm trying to operationalize like the first principles into the future and seeing about how we could capitalize on it in
Yeah.
multiple ways. Capitalize metaphysically, capitalize culturally, capitalize materially.
Yes.
Yeah,
Hell yeah. I really like you. It kind of we had this idea of the hero myth, basically, like trying to really like build what that is, and if you can like if
exactly.
you can map that out, you're basically what you're doing is if you create a very simple like hero structure in society, then that's something that can very easily like systematize, operationalize, and scale. Like, you know, for example, it made me think about like how like foot in the South, like football is like that's like our a lot of our hero structure is around like football or like
Yeah.
military, for example. It's like, you
Yeah.
know, especially the football. It's like, hey, go be on the football team, do well, and you'll be a hero, and everyone will worship you. And so it's
Yeah.
like we're just basically kind of shifting that. We're kind of shifting what it means to be a hero because like obviously like professional football player, it's like yeah, I mean,
Exactly.
that still does hold weight in our society, and that in a lot
Yeah.
of ways that will shift to something like a, you know, even like a professional esports player. Like those are still heroes in a way, but we're also
Yeah.
offering like a another archetype alongside that, like almost like if nothing else, like maybe the Brahmin path. Like you've got your warrior path, you've got your just, you know, general celebrity path, but
Yeah.
yeah, this
I
idea of
mean, I sort of,
like a scientist hero and an info hero and
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, like a priest
Because
hero. Yeah,
exactly, because look at the Avengers. Like they each have their own sort of thing. You know what I mean? Like that's what we're talking about. Like every like Edolan is like their own sort of like their own brand and everything.
yeah.
And so we're gonna have like a shit ton of variety across the logos.
Yeah, and I really like I like the RPG types too, just like warrior, tank, healer, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that just also talks about like we can do a lot of gamification. That's something that's huge, and already will be more and more if we can help give people like
Yeah.
almost like a religion that's framed like a game. And
Yeah.
yes, I think that yeah,
And that game can also bait people into heroism. You know what I mean? And where
pretty
do you
much.
get
Yeah,
but that helps the gamer because now they're in the the highest trust commons.
yes,
So it's like the reciprocity loop completes. It's like there's so many options here. You know what I mean? Like it's a great project. It's a great experiment, I should say. You know what I mean?
yeah,
I'm enjoying
yeah,
it.
yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting because like you'll hear it out there across the like intellectual spheres. You'll hear a lot of people who are, I mean, obviously if someone's like not grounded in science at all, then it's kind of like you know, whatever. And then you've got your science, like your hardcore scientists who are like, oh, they're doing good work, but it's like we all know that something's missing. Like you got to build on top of this. And there's been a few
Yeah.
people who like a lot of people pick up on that and they're like, we need like, you know, some kind of like, can we make Christianity more reconciled with science, or can we just build something new? Or
Yeah.
like, you know, I remember hearing a friend of mine like John Vervaeke a lot, and he was like, we'll call it a religion that's not a religion. And you've
Yeah.
got different pieces of it here and there, but like it just feels like something's missing. And I think sometimes what's missing is like the scope. Like sometimes they tried on a very particular small market, or it could be a lot of factors as to why, you know, people just don't invest as creators. They don't put a lot into it, but yeah, I think we have a lot of potential to make it work though.
Yeah, it's and the other thing, like the other like thing I had in the vote was the Pentanion, which is like the hearth fire for the locals for Shieldwall,
Yeah,
and that's sort of like how I saw like the yearly revenue would come in. So like it would be awesome if like the first few could be like a more prestigious company that we would just kind of serve pro bono or something.
yeah,
But every year the election comes up, so eventually, like in my mind, like sort of projecting a future, like if we can get big enough, like companies will compete for the vote. You know what I mean? Because they want these 100 influencers,
right,
or whatever, to serve their brand for that year. You know what
right,
I mean? So if this is the more the political end, and then you got the share end, like the hypersigil, which is basically just a share, right? But it's also its own mini brand within it, and then you got the metaphysical aspect. So the trifunctionalism is completed.
right.
So it should be interesting.
Hell yeah, very good. One thing I just want to ask about, I kind of got the idea, but I want to clarify. So you said a Dolan. How do you spell that?
EIDOLON.
Okay, so EIDLOOLON.
Oh no, EIDOLON. Eidolon.
Okay, and so where did
Yeah.
that concept come from? It sounds like that kind of is like the archetype or like the hero sort of.
Eidolons are they're just the ancient Greek word for shade, ghost, personification, sort of an abstract uh, premonition, sort of. It basically ghost. It's like an ancient Greek word for ghost or spirit of ancestor or something.
Okay, very cool.
Which is it's like I went through like a lot of words, and I decided that was the best one.
Oh,
It
yeah.
fits exactly what they're doing because they're hyper sigils. They're spirits who bounce from host body to host body, right? So it's implied in the name. They're actually
Yeah,
the hyper
I love
sigils
that.
themselves
Oh
are
man,
alive. Yeah.
I love it so much. I remember hearing people like I remember like Alan Moore was one of the ones who I don't know if you've read some of his. He had one series in particular called Promethea, where he definitely like helps bridge the gap between like what we think of as like ordinary art and writing and storytelling and like actual
Hmm.
magic and religion. Like it's like these things
Exactly.
are so tied together, and other people like Neil Gaiman and so forth, and almost anybody that operates in the occult space understands that language is magic and has this power. And so I think we're very much like systematizing and operationalizing that concept like
Yeah.
through these, especially what you've built is very much along those lines, and I love it.
Yeah, my thing, as long as like we have like the cyberpunk for like a little bit of seriousness, and then we have the Hellenism for aesthetics, and
Yeah,
as long as we're careful, we can get all the best of the established cultural heroism, fictionalisms, but at the same time we can operational in a way that's cool and not corny at all, and can actually work in the real world for the group
hell yeah,
and the public at large. Yeah.
hell yeah, yeah. That's exciting. I love it.
Yeah, man.
Definitely continue to be aligned. I guess I'll be probably like chewing on this more for next time and just continue to just think about some of these things, kind of flesh out my side, and of course like a big part is we want to always be trying to recruit and scale. So I'll be continuing to kind of chat. I do want to ask you of some of the guys in your group, like are there like a couple that you feel like okay these guys are kind of picking up on what I'm doing, or is it kind of like people are still struggling to grasp it? Like how do you feel about that?
No, yeah, no, none of them grasp it at all. But that's why I like them in there because they're like the worst stuff. So basically when I was just experimenting, I just wanted to get some feedback. So basically, I just like added some guys to the group, and like they're all normies. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing. Um, because they're so like these are just random people on the internet who are in the group, right? And as a result, they're a very good baseline for getting that operational aesthetic. Because like getting these guys to do anything is like it takes a lot. Because they're what I mean. Like I'm not really close. Uh, like IAO, like I'm close to him because he's been with me a long time. But if some of the other guys, like they're mostly just lurkers. Like I don't
Right.
have like any strong attachments to them or anything like that. I just kept it in there purely just to keep me company as I like shit posted and stuff. But also too because they're so like they're just random and they're not really invested in any way. They make really good kind of tests,
Yeah.
like kind of test subjects. You know what I mean?
Right. No
Like
biases. Yeah.
yeah, no biases, and they're very baseline. I can kind of get an idea of what they think and stuff. But that'll have to be another talk about how to deal with like Shield Wall's exclusivity and stuff like that. Um, it's tough for me. I kind of like to have like a nice posterity record. You know what I mean? Which is why I kind of like them in there because it gets me talking.
Right.
And I like to, even though like posterity records, they don't mean a lot to most people. Like no one's going to go through it, but I do like to leave it there for like future, not just like future journalists and stuff, but also like future like humans and like AIs and stuff. I like to leave like I like them, just leave them the stories,
Yeah.
so they understand.
That's so interesting. Like this idea, you hear like a lot of people talk about like their legacy, and a lot of that is like in terms of like their kids and their offspring. But like it's almost kind of like a bigger thing where we're talking about like leaving this, for just what comes next, like neo humans, like technology, like just whatever it is, just
Yeah,
like the future in general. I love it. Oh
yeah,
man. Yeah,
crazy
it's
times.
exciting. I mean, like just to consider again, like how powerful like this kind of like conversation, these ideas are. Like this is
Exactly.
like the seeds of like something that absolutely could shape like the entire future. I mean, it's
Exactly, dude. And you got to remember in my head, like I'm picturing like M5 or M6, like selling his hypersigil for like millions of dollars.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like this could be like it could definitely
Well, and I
it could
think about
definitely
it, it's like part of it is like that, that commercialization kind of piece. Like if you were to sell Spider-Man, for example, as like a brand, like that would be that.
exactly.
But even more than that, I mean, like this has the like I mean, for example, just think about the current kind of cabal that like runs the entire show. For them,
Exactly.
money is like nothing. It's like they control it. Like they can just
Yeah.
print money. Like it's not even a concept.
Exactly.
They totally control it. And so what really
Yeah.
matters is just like the underlying ideas that like brings them together and their vision and their religion and that kind of stuff and the
Exactly.
reverberate. So it's like we're operating at a level like well even above that. Like
Yeah.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
it's incredible. It's incredible.
And also, like my secret hope for Shield Wall also too is that we could get like a white hat like angel investor or like a white hat whale who would be interested in like sort of like a neo author like position, you know what I mean, the King Arthur position or something we'd work with, who could help it out a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I don't know, because you got to remember on my end, like the metaphysics and the aesthetics, like I got that in spades. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like that's where our surplus is, our deficit is the, you know what I mean, like we could get it operational, like not a lot of money at all, you know what I mean. But yeah, it's tough.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
Lots of
Yeah.
opportunity though.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll definitely continue to think on it. We'll plan probably try to maybe get another session midweek sometime, maybe like Tuesday
Sure.
or Wednesday, just to keep the ball rolling. Yeah,
Oh,
I'll just be thinking on stuff in general. I'll try to pitch some ideas as I come across, and once again, we'll keep the momentum rolling. I'll look forward to it.
awesome. And I just gotta say, dude, like because you already know like natural law really well, like you don't have to read like Shieldwall's Constitution if you don't want to. What I would recommend is just read Tether Polis. Because my poem, it explains everything just through the story format. And I think it gives like just a great general idea of like where it could be potentially in the future or something. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to do it. Plus, you just get like a good story out of it as well. So
Fuck yeah. Yeah, I'll definitely check it out. I'll definitely do some more research in the meantime to understand more context and where you're coming from and try to continue building these bridges and yeah, man, complete the tree.
righteous.
Grow the tree.
That's
Oh,
right,
yeah.
man. Big old oak.
Fuck yeah. Cool. Alrighty. Well, until next time, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, awesome, bro. Thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate these.
Same here. Talk to you soon.
Peace out, bro.
See ya.